Hello, you're listening to Count Richard von Coudenhove Kalergi. Today is Friday the 13th of December. Hopefully it'll be a lucky day for some. But I just thought I'd put a little video here together within the last 6 days of what happened in Syria. But interesting to note that the 13th of December 2003 was the day Saddam Hussein was captured. And hopefully President Bashar al-Assad won't go the same way as both President Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein went. Now, Bashar al-Assad was actually a qualified eye doctor in the UK and was very well respected before returning back to Syria. And with his deposing ended a 53-year dynasty. Now, for this area here is called Mount Venus, and the Cat and Dogs home was just on the right hand side there, and a little bit further down on the right hand side you have the Mount Venus Cemetery and its ever growing population. Now, interestingly, the same day that the rebel forces took Syria and got within 10 miles of Damascus was the 7th of December, which was also the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, the 7th of December, which was described by President Roosevelt at the time as a day that will go down in infamy. And unfortunately, I think you can see the same with Syria. But you can only imagine the level of reprisals that will be punished for people who either cooperated with the Assad regime, and also to mention too as well of the level of the persecution of Christians. That one of the things Assad actually did was he helped the Christians in Syria. And I remember back in 2017, Tulsi Gabbard, when she was a senator, took the time to go out and do a fact-finding mission about the persecution of Christians in Syria. And I have to say, I found her account and the way she spoke about it actually very moving. But actually no, I'm going to go this way here. Sometimes I forget me directions at night. But this is coming on to the Edmondstown Road here, and straight on down to that pub, the Merry Ploughboy, famous for its traditional music and its culture night, which I'm sure this time of year now will be booked out every night. You can see the lights of the city in front there, and this is a nice little back road here. Occasionally you actually see deer on it. And the turning circle in the Passat isn't as good as the Old Merc, but it's still a nice drive, and it's actually one of my favourite drives. You come to a junction down here onto what's known as Mutton Lane, and then a turn off that and you're on to Clora Road. But the Mount Venus nursery is up straight on there on the left hand side, and a little further on you have the cafe called the Wheel. So, but interesting to note that in St. John's book of Revelations, it starts with the letter to the 7 churches, and one of the churches was in a place called Ephesus, which was a seaport. But due to the Romans were kicked out, one of the things that the Romans actually did was they kept the port silt free due to dredging. But since they stopped dredging, that port is now 6 miles inland, is an abandoned city 6 miles inland. But also to note in Syria is the famous ruins of Palmyra, which were a 2,000-year-old, built over 2,000 years ago by the Romans, which was sacked in 1400 by the Mongol warlord Timur. With the island East Timor is named after him, and he was known as Tamerlane because he had a limp. But a fearsome warlord he did, coming through Persia. One of the things he used to do after capturing a town, if they didn't surrender, as he was a Muslim, if they didn't surrender, or convert to Islam, they were beheaded. And one of his little hobbies was to build pyramids out of the towers of skulls of people he beheaded. But so you can only imagine the level of instability that's going to happen now in Syria, and at the moment there's up to 370,000 people who are already displaced, and up to 15 of the EU countries are refusing to take any of their fleeing Syrians. So I'd like to do is just leave a couple of videos there. One was an interview with Wesley Clarke talking about that list, and the other is from I'm going to leave a little bit of a clip from Colonel McGregor talking to Judge Napolitana, and also I'd like to leave a little bit from that video on Tulsi Gabbard back from, I think it's 2017. And I'm just going to go up here. This is the Columbus College, and you might see some deer up on the road here. You know, up this way, I think Adam Clayton lives in one of these houses up here. But I have a friend who lives up here, and every now and again he doesn't mind a visit. So
Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz, I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the joint staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
And every single house or store, it's somebody's dream, it's somebody's life,
right.
Savings, it's a story itself, and it's gone. It's just gone.
As a civilized people, we are targeted by these terrorists because they don't want neither the man be man nor the woman to be a woman. They want slaves, and we will not be slaves.
There's 2 more unexploded.
Our church was established in 1848, but the building goes beyond that. And we used to worship here until 2012 July. On July, when we came to the church to worship, we faced some gangs in who asked us to leave the church. So we left the church. Later, the backyard of the church was targeted by them and exploded by them. Later on, at the end of the year, maybe on November of 2012, they bombed the church from down and exploded all. And they were happy on their websites, being proud to say that we destroyed people who worship 3 gods. They think that as Christians we believe in 3 gods. Anyway, the government gave us all the facilities to build a new church, and I hope that you will have the chance, even you can visit our new church with the help of our partners all around the world and from Peace USA themselves. We had many calls from all around the world because of the destruction of the church. But they tried to give us a different impression about who are Muslims. But this is not reality, because we know Muslims very well. We lived with them for long centuries. In fact, they tried to distort the picture of Islam. And again, the first call I have received from His Excellence Mufti Ahmed Sheikh Badruddin Hassoun, who said it very clearly to me that we will rebuild the church again. And at the same time, as a community, as you see all around you, we come here just to say that they thought that the church is the building, but the church was never the building. The church is the community. And we know that we are called to be the salt of the world and the light of the world. And we know that we have mission in this country. Many people who came from all around the world, they asked me, how do you know that the gangs did this? And I said it very clearly. When you look to their weapons, you can know who exploded the church. And the Syrian army, legal army, never used such this. If you look at it, this is part of their weapon, and that this is not exploded. But don't be close to it in order that we will not be in danger. So, as a community in the city of Aleppo, we know from the beginning that we are not having rebels. We have terrorists. All who are modern people who think in the terms of this age are targeted by them. They want this country to be bad. They want us not to be improved and developed as a community. And their plan is to have an Islamic state in this country. And they didn't read the history. They didn't know that Christianity was spread out from this country, from Antioch. So we will continue being here, and really we feel proud that we received you in our country. I know very well what are the obligations over you to not come. But really, we will continue to be human beings here. We are we have very great attitude to you to be here. So now we can speak. Not only our partners as a church in the West are with us, also there are congressmen who feel with us and express their emotions with us in our suffering in this country. Lord, we thank you for everybody who is with us now, and we ask you to continue with us in our journey in this country in order that we will not lose our identity as a salt of the world and as a light of the world. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, through the Holy Spirit, we raise our prayer to you, Father. Please listen us and answer our prayers. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hello.
Turkey there now with the list of the 7 churches as mentioned in the book of Revelations. Now it's interesting to note that the current population of Turkey is roughly 83 million, with 99% Muslim, and the Christian population is estimated to be in around 300,000, which is a decline from between 25% and 25% in 1914 to around 2% in 1927. So you can see the gradual decline of Christians in the Middle East certainly has to be a concern. Now there's a photograph of the ancient city of Palmyra, which at its peak had up to 200,000 people living in and around the area. It was part of the Silk Route and was built around an oasis. And unfortunately, during the Syrian civil war, the antiquities of this area were looted by ISIS forces, and thanks to the intervention of the Russian Air Force, the Syrian army took back control of this area in 2017. And here's a map of the ancient city, which I'd say it'd be such an interesting place to visit. And there's a picture of a bust of Timur, who died in 1405 after setting up his empire in 70. And here is a battle plan of Syria as of December the 3rd. But just a couple of things about Syria. The pre-war population of Syria was 22 million, including 13 million, 1.3 million Iraqi refugees and 500,000 Palestinian refugees, and up to 250,000 people have estimated died in that conflict. Now, the pre-war Christian population was in around 10%, and that has gone down to less than 300,000. And at the start of the 20th century, Christians made up 25% of the population of Syria. So you can see how the reduction of Christians in the Middle East is widespread. And there seems to be a map of, now that Assad has actually gone, the possibility of getting a pipeline through Turkey, which would stop energy being supplied from Russia. So there are a couple of comments which are my own. Thanks for listening. Good evening, good luck, and God bless.
Gears, Colonel, what role did the United States play, if any, in toppling President Assad of Syria?
I think we have to take credit for having played a very major role. We have had people on the ground working to remove Assad certainly since 2011. And we could go through this timeline, but the point to keep in mind is that we've done everything we could to support his removal, because that, of course, was the wish of the Israeli government. They were always anxious to remove Assad and would do anything at all possible to remove him. Keep in mind, right now in Egypt and in Jordan, the other two Arab states that border Israel, other than Lebanon, we have what are effectively regarded in the Arab world as puppet governments that are essentially loyal to us. We buy them. In fact, this morning I discovered that a $900 million check from the U.S. Treasury just arrived this morning in Jordan. The Jordanian government will obviously be very grateful for that. We have been renegotiating the debt that Egypt has. In other words, we have bribed people in those places. We bribe people all over the world, but specifically in those places to keep them on side when it comes to Israel. Now, the Jordanians are in a tough spot because the Israelis can shut off their water supply. They're not anxious to end up like Gaza at this point. Egypt's a little different now, and the Egyptian population there is very angry. We should come back to that, because what happens in Egypt is very important, and you could see something similar to what has happened in Syria happen in Egypt.
Here's the president of Syria, President Assad, before he was deposed. This is in 2017, saying very similar to what you said, that the United States does not want partners, it only wants puppets. The key part to what he says, this is about 60 seconds long, the key part to what he says, with which I suspect you'll agree, is at the very end. Chris, number 13.
The problem in the United States is about the whole political system. It's not about one person. Trump's election has proven again for us, again and again, that the president is only a performer. He's not the decision maker. He's part of different lobbies and the deep state, or the deep regime, as we can call it, who implement and dictate on the president what should he be doing. And the proof to what I'm saying, that Trump, after he became president, he swallowed most of the promises and the word that he was boosting during his campaign. He made 180 turn in nearly every promise. So why? Because the deep state wouldn't allow him to go in certain direction. That's why, for me, dealing with him as a person, it could be, but can that person deliver? No. In the United States, president cannot deliver. The whole state, the deep state only, is the one who can deliver. And this is the problem. This deep state doesn't accept partners around the world. They only accept puppets. They only accept followers. They only accept proxies. That's what they accept. We're not any of these.
He's gone, of course, but I think he had a good handle on the influence of the deep state in foreign affairs, don't you?
Well, he's repeating essentially what President Putin has said and others have said over the years. And in his case, he tried to evade becoming a puppet or being removed through the arrangements that the Russians, Iranians, and Turks made in Sochi and Astana. And these were agreements that were designed to essentially freeze the ceasefire after ISIS and its offspring and affiliates, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, and so forth, had been defeated back in the teens. He thought this would last. Obviously, it didn't. It was never a perfect outcome because there was a Kurdish state emerging in the northeast of Syria, and the Turks had moved into and occupied a portion of northern Syria and then created, under Erdogan, this enclave of radical Islamists, essentially the survivors of ISIS, and nurtured them over the years and prepared them for what they're doing now. We've also done the same thing in the enclave that we control over on the border with Iraq. We've repurposed many of the same people, roughly 11,000 of them. And about 17, 18,000 more were under Erdogan. And of course, Mossad was involved with the CIA and MI6 in the equipping and training. But the principal job of coaching the Islamists collectively in how to do it and where to go and what to do is really President Erdogan.
The funding that the United States through the CIA and other intelligence services supplied, did it make its way to al-Jilani, who has a $10 million bounty on his head because he cuts the heads of other people off?
Well, I rather suspect so. And I don't think he's terribly worried about the bounty at this point because obviously we are his allies.
Right.
We are 100% aligned with them. And what you're seeing, and this is where we really ought to spend some time, people need to understand that we're watching something that we have not seen yet in the 21st century. We've seen it in the 20th century and earlier in European history, which is a formal partition of a third country by at least two other partners, maybe more, and that's Syria. It has an uncanny resemblance to the partitions of Poland in 1795 and the partitions of Poland later on again in 1939. Between 1795 and 1939, in both cases, the Polish state vanished and only came back later as a consequence of new powers emerging and demands made by the new winners of the Second World War. What we see in Syria is something similar. And we already know that the Israelis have forces on the outskirts of Damascus. And we know from the map that President Netanyahu held up in front of the UN when he spoke to it, showed effectively his Greater Israel plan. And the Greater Israel document includes the lower half of Syria, much of Jordan, and reaches all the way over into Egypt, as well as most of Lebanon. And this is very real now. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when things were going very, very badly in southern Lebanon, as well as in Gaza, people lost sight of this. But this has been cooking for some time. We have ultimately had a great deal to do with organizing this. And of course, Mr. Erdogan has made no secret of his Ottoman aspirations or ambitions. He's got maps floating around on Turkish television that show Greece and Bulgaria as part of Turkey, along with most of the Caucasus, parts of northern Iran, and most of Syria and most of northern Iraq. So these are two states with two leaders right now, Netanyahu and Erdogan, who are determined to realize their dreams. And we have simply said, go for it. The problem with all of this is you've unleashed a tiger, at least two tigers, and you don't know where this is all going to end up. And that's why people in Egypt are now very uneasy about the potential for the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt to become another disciple of Erdogan in this great game. And we don't know what could possibly happen in Jordan and how long we will tolerate that state under anybody other than Israeli direction. And now if you move to Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, they are genuinely fearful. And they're not probably going to want to bet very heavily on any guarantees that we give them. It's a very strange situation. It's something nobody expected to see. We have always listened to people with aspirations and show us maps with new territory, but now these aspirations are realities, and the realities are dangerous for the entire region and potentially, depending upon how the rest of the world acts, to the world.
Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu is being cross-examined in a criminal case in which he is the defendant accused of bribery. in Tel Aviv? Is his IDF actually conquering, stealing land that 2 weeks ago was part of Syria?
Well, I don't think they have to conquer much. They launched a furious air campaign over the last 72 hours to destroy virtually everything that had any military value on the ground in Syria. And I think that was also part of the broader plan to pay off all of the senior officers in the Syrian army to back down and turn everything over to them. That was very successful in terms of destroying what was there. That doesn't mean, though, that the Islamist hordes that are running wild across Syria don't have other sources of equipment and ammunition. They do. It's called Turkey. And the Turkish military is moving cautiously behind them. The Turkish military intelligence officers are forward. They're seeing what's happening. They're reporting. And again, Erdogan is coaching. We think they're probably going to kill at least 100,000 people if they haven't already done it in Syria. But Erdogan has coached them and say, don't kill everybody. Avoid villages that are Christian, avoid certain areas. We don't want to awaken the West to what's happening. And ultimately, I think that'll be the end of the Christian community in Syria, and probably inevitably what's left of it in Iraq, unless the Shiites in Iraq can protect them as they have in the past. So it's a very grim situation, Judge.
The militant groups that you're referring to as Islamic hordes, they're hardly Zionists. I mean, might Israel have unleashed a tiger which would try to consume it?
No, I think that's true. And if you just take a step back and think back to 1939, Guderian, who commanded forces in Poland, was sent to the demarcation line to meet his Soviet counterpart, where they would agree to the final line of demarcation between Soviet and German interests in 1939. And he remarked in his diary and later confided to Hitler that he had an ominous feeling about the whole thing, because he said ultimately this border has been moved from its former position, that is the Soviet border, 300 miles further to the west. He was obviously worried in the future about a Soviet attack. Now I think the Israelis are looking at the ground. There's not much in southern Syria, frankly. It's mostly open desert once you get off the Golan. And there's really nothing much until you get to Damascus. And it's very obvious that Mr. Netanyahu wants to claim Damascus. Now, once that's done and this line is drawn, they will gradually realize, I think, in Israel, if they haven't already, that they have moved Turkish power, influence, military capability, subterfuge, you name it, much, much closer to Israel than it has ever been before. And the Turks are formidable. In other words, whatever we're seeing now that looks like a honeymoon between these two groups that both want hegemony, it's not likely to last, Judge.
Colonel, is there any moral or legal justification? Now, I suppose I could stop there and you'll say, Judge, the intelligence community, the deep state doesn't care about morality or law, but is there any moral or legal justification for American warplanes bombing military assets in Syria, the American government funding the terrorists, the jihadists that took over Syria? Is there even the remotest concern for American national security, or is all of this because of our obeisance to Israel?
Well, I think most of it is Israeli connected. There's no question about it. We have supported Israel, and for many good reasons over many decades. The idea of supporting Israel now in this larger land grab, that's another matter entirely. That always is fraught with problems, as we've seen in previous wars. That's why I don't think this is the end of something. I think this is the beginning of something very new that's ultimately going to come crashing down on all of us. Now, at the same time, America has always been very myopic about seeing its potential opponents or adversaries or enemies. We obsess over one. The Israelis demonized Iran and saw to it that Iran was the ultimate evil that had to be crushed. We have adopted that position. Well, let's assume that you're successful, and eventually this results in the destruction of Iran, that we and the Israelis, along with help from the Turks, because the Turks, of course, are also in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan and Turkey regard themselves as two states in one nation. Azerbaijan borders Iran and has provided the Israelis with platforms with support, with airfields from which they can strike Iran. And of course, the Israelis have conferred enormous advantages militarily with drones and other equipment on the Turks in Azerbaijan, who are trying to drive out what remains of Armenia from the Caucasus. I think we're going to see that play out too in the near future. That'll be a second front for Iran, and God knows what will happen to the Armenians in the Caucasus. But the point is that we're so focused on the destruction of Iran as the principal problem. And that's something I've never signed up for and don't agree with. It doesn't matter what I think or you think. We see that very, very myopically, to the point where we don't look at the peripheral consequences, the collateral damage. Just as we were anxious to destroy Germany and Japan until there was nothing left during the Second World War, woke up and discovered that we had consigned half of the world to communism, half of Europe and most of Asia. There was no thinking about the consequences of empowering Soviet military strength, which we did. And without us, the Soviets would have had an enormously difficult time prevailing against the Germans. So we don't think about those things. We're so busy focusing in one direction that the consequences that are there are simply ignored. And I think what's happening right now is there will be great consequences strategically in the region. And by the way, remember, this is not something that the Russians signed up for, but the Russians have never regarded their position in the Middle East, especially in Syria, as the vital strategic outpost for Russian influence. It isn't. There are other places that they can go and other places where they will be welcomed. So they're not going to fight to the bitter end for a place like Syria. They did everything they could, but clearly Assad was unable to reform, reorganize anything. He didn't have much money. We'd starved him of that. We'd, once again, it's bully, sanction, and bomb. We've done plenty of that. So his fate was sealed once it became clear that Erdogan was willing to work closely with Israel, because Erdogan has his own agenda. And again, this is the problem. You empower an alliance like this, the Israeli de facto alliance for hegemony in the region,
Right.
and you end up with problems, with serious problems over which you have no control anymore.
I remember a line from JFK's inaugural address: "Foolish people have tried to gain power by riding the back of a tiger and have ended up inside."